The galaxy cast them out. Earth welcomed them as family. The pod had 43 life signs, and a hull that was 2 minutes from cracking open like an egg. I did not wait for authorization. I hit the docking clamps, fired the magnetic tow, and pulled it in before the senior officer on duty even knew what frequency I was using. My name is Kara Ellison, Corporal, Earth Border Liaison, stationed at Waystation Kestrel 4. I had been in this job for 6 years. I had never seen a pod that small hold that many living things. The bay doors sealed behind it. Pressurization took 40 seconds. I was already moving. When the hatch blew, the smell hit me first. Stale air, something chemical, something biological, then the sounds. Not screaming, worse. The kind of quiet that comes after people have already given up on screaming. I counted bodies packed shoulder to shoulder in a space meant for 12. 6-limbed, pale-shelled, with eyes that caught the light in rings. Keth. Every single one of them was Keth. The Keth had been formally dissolved by Galactic Conclave Decree 18 months ago. I knew exactly what my standing orders said about unregistered biomass. I had read them plenty of times. I set them aside, keyed the medical channel, and said, Bay 7, all available personnel, now. The Conclave called species like the Keth unregistered biomass. That is a real term. It is printed in their official documentation with a seal and a registry number. It means the species has been stripped of legal existence. No trade rights, no travel lanes, no protection. The Conclave does not kill them outright. It simply stops recognizing that they are alive, and then waits for the universe to finish the job. Humanity had been watching the Conclave do this for 40 years. We had a Tier 6 provisional rating, which is the galactic equivalent of being allowed to sit near the table but not at it. The Conclave expected us to be grateful for that much and keep quiet. We were not quiet. We were not organized about it either. There was no grand Earth policy, no official program, no ceremony. What happened was simpler and stranger than that. An Earth cargo ship found 3 Vreth survivors floating near a debris field 12 years ago and brought them home. A border medic on a station in the Outer Ring took in a family of Darathi refugees on a cold night and forgot to file the eviction paperwork. A port administrator named Owen Greer decided that the Mujan traders camped outside his station needed somewhere to sleep and gave them a bay, then another bay, then a whole wing. He retired before anyone thought to stop him. The Keth, who had survived 18 months of running and hiding and dying in deep space, had finally picked up an old emergency frequency that nobody else in the galaxy would answer. Somebody on Earth still monitored it. That was how it worked. Slowly, imperfectly, stubbornly. By the time anyone in authority noticed, we had dozens of species living inside Earth's borders, raising children in mixed neighborhoods, running food stalls on our stations, arguing with our engineers over coolant schematics. The Conclave found it administratively baffling. We found it normal. I stayed in Bay 7 for 4 hours. The Keth elder came to me while the doctors were still working on the 3 in organ failure. He moved carefully, watching everything. His name was Velthrex. His shell was scarred in patterns that were not decorative. He had compound eyes that processed light differently than ours, and they moved constantly, cataloging threats. He had survived 18 months of being officially non-existent. He did not trust me. I did not expect him to. He asked me, in broken Conclave standard, what the price was. I told him there was no price. He asked what we wanted from the Keth. I said nothing. We had no use for anything the Keth had. We just needed Bay 7 and a few more medical kits. He stared at me for a long time. The children behind him had started to creep forward, the way children always do when adults run out of reasons to be afraid, and a human medic named Lena Byrne was already crouched down near the smallest ones, showing them how a pulse oximeter worked, making it flash colors on her fingertip to get them to laugh. Velthrex watched Lena do that. He did not say anything else. He went back to his people. I went back to my desk. The diplomatic vessel arrived 31 hours later. It was sleek, white, and carried conclave markings on every surface. Ambassador Rokan stepped off it, looking like someone who had spent the trip preparing exactly what he was going to say. He was Veth Prime, which in practical terms meant he represented the top tier of the conclave hierarchy. He had credentials that could redraw trade borders, He had a smile that never reached his secondary sensory organs. He presented his demand formally, in writing, with a seal. Surrender the Keth survivors for species adjudication. The document cited Article 7 of the Galactic Compact, the Dissolution Decree, and 3 additional clauses I had never heard of. It was immaculate paperwork. He looked at me the way people look at a minor inconvenience they plan to remove with minimal effort. I told him I would pass the message along. Commander Isha Ndori was already on the comm when I got back to the operations center. Isha was the kind of commanding officer who had been bending regulations for so long that she had developed an instinct for exactly how far they would bend before snapping. She looked at me through the screen with the expression she reserved for situations that required patience and creativity in equal measure. She told me publicly that Earth was reviewing the legal particulars. She told me privately to buy 72 hours. Velthrex found me in the corridor that night. He had figured out enough of the situation by listening and watching and putting pieces together. He offered to take his people back to the pod and leave. He said it plainly, without drama. He would not have humans destroyed over the Keth. He said the Keth had caused enough suffering for others already, and he was not going to add to it. I looked at him for a moment. I thought about how to explain something that humans have a hard time articulating even to each other. I told him that we did not trade people for status, that we had never done it, that it was not a policy, and it was not a heroic decision. It was just the way we were built. Some things were simply not currency to us, and living people were one of them. He was quiet for a long time. Then he showed me something. It was a gesture, slow and deliberate. His upper limbs moved in a specific pattern, and the pale bioluminescent patches along his sides shifted through colors in a sequence. I did not know what it meant yet. I learned later that it was the beginning of a Keth phrase that had no direct translation in any conclave language. The closest approximation was something like, "The debt owed to the one who saw you when the universe looked away." He went back to his people. I went back to mine. We both had work to do. Isha's 72 hours were the most productive 72 hours I had ever witnessed from a legal team. Earth's diplomatic office was a 23-person operation that the Conclave had largely ignored for 2 decades. They had spent those 2 decades reading every clause, every annex, every sub-provision of the Galactic Compact. They knew it better than most of the people who had written it. What they surfaced from that reading changed everything. Deep in the founding charter of the Conclave, in a section that had not been cited in over a century, there was a clause about species dissolution. It was placed there originally to protect powerful species from being erased by rivals through political maneuvering. It stated that a dissolution decree was legally void if surviving members could demonstrate cultural continuity across a generation. The Keth had 11 children aboard that pod, 11 children who still spoke their language, still knew their rituals, still carried their history in their memories. That was cultural continuity. At the same time, Isha had been making calls. 7 species already integrated into Earth systems, the Vreth, the Durathi, the Mu'un, and 4 others who had once been exactly where the Keth were now, had agreed to file simultaneous diplomatic protests on the Keth's behalf. And Earth's legal team had prepared a formal application to register the Keth as an Earth Protectorate species, which under conclave law would grant them the full status tier of their patron. Earth was Tier 6. That was not enough on its own. But 7 co-sponsoring species, each with their own partial standing in various conclave sub-jurisdictions, created a combined weight that the charter had never anticipated. The math worked. Barely. But it worked. Rokon received the response package with an expression that was extremely controlled. He requested a formal hearing aboard Kestrel 4. He said it would be on neutral territory. He arrived expecting a small delegation and an apology. What he found was different. Commander Ndori stood at the head of the table. Earth's full legal team flanked her. Representatives of 11 integrated refugee species sat as named parties, each one present by choice, each one there because they remembered being where the Keth were now, and at the end of the table, standing quietly with his hands folded, was Velthrex, named party. Keth representative, officially non-existent by conclave decree, and physically present in the room where that decree was being challenged. Behind the observation glass, the rest of the Keth watched. Roken's case was thorough and legally precise. He argued that the cultural continuity clause had never been applied to a dissolved species, and that precedent did not support the interpretation. He argued that Earth's status tier was insufficient for protectorate sponsorship. He argued that the co-sponsorship mechanism was a procedural maneuver that the Charter did not intend to permit. Every argument was delivered in the measured tone of someone who had won many rooms and expected to win this one. Indori's team answered each point without raising their voices. The cultural continuity clause did not specify that it had to have been applied before. It specified the conditions, and the conditions were met. Earth's status tier was sufficient for provisional sponsorship, and the co-sponsorship mechanism was not prohibited anywhere in the Charter. The absence of prohibition was not the same as prohibition. The Conclave's own founding documents supported the position. Then Rokan made his mistake. He turned to Velthrex and asked him directly why any rational species would choose to put their survival in the hands of a Tier 6 civilization that could not even guarantee its own standing. The room was quiet. Velthrex did not answer in Conclave Standard. He answered in Keth. His limbs moved and his bioluminescent patches shifted through a sequence of colors that I had been studying for 2 days, every spare minute I had. Rokan did not have a translator for Keth. Nobody in the Conclave did. The language had been considered irrelevant since the dissolution decree. I translated. I stood up from the observer's chair, walked to the table, and I said the words in Conclave Standard. My pronunciation was not perfect. My color pulse mimicry was rougher than Velthrex's. But the meaning was clear, and everyone in the room heard it. Because they opened the door. Rokan had nothing to say to that. The Conclave could not legally block the application. The Charter was the Charter. They recessed to deliberate. It was the first time in Conclave history that a formal deliberation had been forced over a Tier 6 petition. Their legal historians confirmed that within the hour, and seemed personally offended by it. They came back with provisional protectorate status for the Keth. It was the minimum they could provide under the law. They attached 14 conditions. Isha accepted all 14 without reading them aloud, because she had already reviewed them and already knew that the co-sponsorship clause rendered 12 of them unenforceable, and the other 2 were administrative paperwork that Earth's office could handle in an afternoon. We signed. Rokan left without ceremony. His vessel undocked and was gone before the next shift started. I watched it go from the observation bay window and did not feel triumphant. I felt tired and a little hungry, and glad that the 3 Keth who had been in organ failure were all stable. Velthrex came to find me there. He stood beside me at the window and looked out at the stars for a while. Then he performed the full sequence. Not the beginning of it that he had shown me the night before. All of it. Every movement, every color pattern, deliberate and slow and precise. It was long. It took nearly 4 minutes. I stood still and watched him do it. I learned afterward that the Vethmora gesture had not been performed for a non-Keth entity in the entire recorded history of their species. It was not something they gave lightly or symbolically. It was a permanent acknowledgment. It meant that the debt was real, that it was recognized, that it would be carried forward. It meant that the Keth would remember. I did not know what to say, so I said the only Keth phrase I had learned that felt right. I said the word for family. My pronunciation was terrible. Velthrex's patches shifted through what I had come to recognize as their version of quiet amusement. He corrected me gently, and I tried again. It was better the second time. In the months that followed, 3 more dissolved species sent probes toward Earth's outer border. Not distress signals, not emergency beacons, probes carrying simple identification codes and a query flag. The galactic equivalent of knocking on a door and asking if anyone was home. Word travels, even among the discarded. Especially among the discarded. They share information the way survivors always do, carefully and accurately, because their lives depend on getting it right. The Conclave upgraded Earth to Tier 4. They did it without ceremony and without announcement, burying the reclassification in a quarterly administrative update that they clearly hoped nobody would notice. They did it because a species that had successfully absorbed the legal standing, cultural integration, and diplomatic weight of over a dozen refugee populations was not Tier 6 by any honest calculation. And the Conclave, whatever else it was, did care about honest calculations. Status was their religion, and their religion required accuracy. Isha sent me a message when the reclassification came through. It was 4 words. It said, "Told you so, Kara." I sent back 2 words, "You're welcome." The Keth were given living quarters in the station's east wing, while the formal integration process began. The children found the common area within about 6 hours, and started playing a game with the Vreth kids that involved a lot of running, and what appeared to be color-coded rules that changed every few minutes. Lena Byrne had taught the 3 youngest ones how to play cards. They were already better at it than she was. Velthrex began meeting regularly with Owen Greer's successor in the integration office. They had long conversations about paperwork, about housing, about education, about the particular challenges of integrating a 6-limbed species into infrastructure designed for 2-limbed ones. Velthrex turned out to have strong opinions about structural engineering. The integration officer turned out to have strong opinions about cultural protocol. They argued constantly, and got a remarkable amount done. I went back to my desk. There was a new beacon on the board, outer ring, bearing 279, consistent with a small craft running without full power. The signal pattern was not one I recognized from any current Conclave registry. I ran it through the database and got no match. No match meant not registered. Not registered meant the Conclave would call it unregistered biomass and expect me to log it, quarantine it, and report it for adjudication. I looked at the signal for a moment. Then I pulled up the medical channel and said, "Lena, can you prep Bay 3? We have company coming." She said, "Again?" I said, "Again?" She said, "Fine," and that she would need more of the small blankets because they always seem to need the small blankets, and to let her know the size of the life forms as soon as I had a scan, and that the card game could wait. I was already running the scan. The galaxy had rules about who mattered and who did not. It had centuries of precedent and immaculate paperwork, and a hierarchy maintained by species who had decided a long time ago that status was the only thing worth protecting. They had built something very large and very cold and very certain of itself. We had Bay 3 and a medical team who were already pulling on gloves. I sent out the tow signal, locked onto the beacon, and started pulling them in. They were not going to be cast out. Not here. Not on my watch. Not on Earth's watch. That was not pride talking. It was not politics. It was not even a decision. Not really. It was just what we did. It was just what we were. The bay doors opened. We went to work.